Emily Carter was only 16 when she went missing, and soon everyone in town started whispering the same name, her stepmother, Claire Carter. Once seen as a caring woman, people now feared she had turned her own home into a place of pain and secrets. Rosewood was a small, quiet town. The streets had tall oak trees, neighbors greeted each other every morning, and gossip was usually harmless about new shops or house repairs. But all of that peace broke the day Emily vanished. She was smart, stubborn, and still so young. She lived with her father, Daniel, and his new wife, Claire. When she didn't come home one Friday night, the entire town felt a cold unease. At first, people thought she had run away. Teenagers sometimes did, especially when life at home was tense. Emily had struggled to accept her stepmother, feeling less important to her father since Claire arrived. Friends remembered her frustration with strict rules, early curfews, phone limits, and fewer chances to see her friends. To outsiders, it looked like tough parenting. To Emily, it felt like a prison, so many believed she had left to escape. But as days turned to weeks, hope began to fade. Posters with Emily's smiling face were everywhere, but they slowly curled and faded in the sun. Daniel stood in front of cameras, begging for her return, his voice breaking with every word. Claire stood beside him, calm and cold, never showing the same grief. Some thought she was simply in shock, others thought it meant something far worse. The police searched fields, woods, and abandoned houses. They questioned neighbors, classmates, and family members. But there were no clues, no clothes, no notes, nothing to show where Emily had gone. If she had run away, why hadn't she contacted anyone? Why hadn't she taken her favorite things? It felt as though she had disappeared without a trace. Claire, meanwhile, tried to shape the story. She told people Emily was rebellious and hard to control, that running away was only a matter of time. But her words didn't sound worried. Instead, she seemed dismissive, even relieved. When people offered to join the search, Claire would tell them not to bother. Her attitude unsettled everyone. Behind closed doors, Emily's friends said she hated being left alone with Claire. She started avoiding activities she once loved just to keep away from home. Teachers noticed her schoolwork growing darker, her once bright spirit fading into silence. It was as though something heavy was pressing down on her, something no one fully saw until she was gone. Police soon realized Emily's case wasn't like other runaways. The details didn't fit, and unease grew heavier with each day. It wasn't just about where Emily had gone, it became about what had happened inside the Carter house before that night. Detectives turned their focus back to the family home. From the outside, it looked normal with flowers and neat hedges. But they knew appearances could lie. With a search warrant in hand, they dug deeper. What they found disturbed even the most experienced officers. In the basement, they came across a heavy metal door, different from the rest. It wasn't just locked, it was reinforced with bolts and a large padlock, far too strong for ordinary storage. Breaking it open, they stepped into a windowless room. The air was stale and foul. Against the walls were restraints fixed to the floor, a thin mattress covered in stains, and items showing someone had been forced to stay there for long periods. It wasn't storage, it was a cell. More disturbing than the physical evidence was what they found stacked in boxes nearby. Journals, dozens of them, each filled with neat, precise handwriting. At first glance, they seemed like diaries, but a closer look revealed something chilling. The entries described punishments, rules, and schedules, all revolving around control of a single person, Emily. Each page documented behaviors, infractions, and consequences in a cold, methodical tone. There were no words of care or affection, only commands and accounts of discipline. It read less like a parent guiding a child and more like an overseer monitoring a captive. The basement discoveries changed everything about the investigation. What had once been seen as a missing teenager now appeared to be the aftermath of something far more sinister. Detectives began piecing together the timeline of Emily's last months. The journals suggested she had not simply run away, but had been trapped in that basement, living under a system of strict control. Some entries even referenced ways to silence disobedience and ensure compliance, hinting at methods that went far beyond punishment and into outright torment. Photographs and personal belongings found in the room added another layer of horror. Emily's school notebooks, drawings, and clothes were scattered around, evidence that she had spent time there against her will. The investigators realized that while the rest of the house gave off an image of order and normal family life, the basement told a story of cruelty hidden just beneath the surface. It was a dual existence: upstairs, the picture of domestic stability; downstairs, a nightmare carefully concealed. Neighbors who once dismissed concerns about Claire now felt a deep unease. The fact that such a room had existed undetected for so long made them question everything they thought they knew. Police released no details publicly at first, but whispers spread quickly, fueled by shock and disbelief. How could a stepmother, someone entrusted with care, create a space designed for confinement? The final detail that unsettled detectives most was the abrupt ending of the journals. The last entry, dated just days before Emily's disappearance, was shorter than the rest. It mentioned a plan, written cryptically, as though Claire had reached a final decision. After that, nothing more was recorded. The silence of those pages was as haunting as the words that came before, suggesting that whatever had happened next was to final, to decisive, to need further notes. For investigators, the basement was no longer just evidence. It was a window into the mind of someone capable of horrors no one in Rosewood had imagined. While the town reeled from the shocking discoveries inside the Carter home, Claire was transferred to the county jail to await trial. The evidence already pointed to her role in Emily's disappearance, but investigators soon realized the story was far from over. Behind bars, Claire was not silent. Other inmates began whispering about her, describing her as someone who carried herself with an unsettling confidence, as if she believed she was untouchable. It wasn't too long before one inmate stepped forward with information that added an entirely new dimension to the case. According to this inmate, Claire had spoken openly about what she had done, not with remorse but with pride. She allegedly described the control she had over Emily, portraying it as proof of her strength and dominance. At first, detectives were cautious. Inmates sometimes fabricated stories to gain favor or reduce their own sentences. But as the details unfolded, the information aligned with things only someone directly involved in Emily's abuse would know. The most disturbing revelation, however, was the suggestion that Emily was not Claire's only victim. The inmate claimed Claire hinted at another child years earlier, a foster daughter from a previous relationship. The story described a girl who had gone missing under suspicious circumstances in a nearby county, a case that had long gone cold. Detectives revisited the files and were stunned at the similarities. The foster child had also been reported as a runaway, with no signs of foul play at the time. Back then, Claire had avoided suspicion, blending into the background as a temporary guardian who claimed she had done her best. Now, with the information from jail, those old details took on an entirely new meaning. Digging into Claire's past, investigators began to uncover troubling patterns. She had moved frequently, leaving behind incomplete stories and fractured relationships. In each place, children had described her as strict, even cruel, though none of their accounts had been strong enough to warrant official intervention. Her ability to mask her behavior in public while maintaining control behind closed doors made her seem ordinary, even respectable, to those who only saw her surface. To the people she lived with, however, she was something entirely different. The idea that Emily's suffering might not have been unique turned the case into something larger. Detectives now considered whether Claire could have been responsible for multiple disappearances, her methods hidden under the guise of discipline and authority. The jailhouse revelations pushed the investigation beyond the boundaries of Rosewood and into neighboring counties, where old files were pulled, witnesses re-interviewed, and forgotten suspicions revived. For the families of missing children, the possibility of answers brought both hope and dread. If Claire truly had a history of cruelty, it meant years of suffering had gone unnoticed. It also meant that Emily's case was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a much darker pattern. The weight of this realization made the upcoming trial even more critical. Claire was no longer seen as just a stepmother accused of harming her husband's daughter. She was becoming a figure linked to a potential series of hidden crimes, her name whispered with fear even inside the jail where she awaited judgment. The inmate's account forced investigators to confront a chilling possibility. Emily's disappearance was not the beginning of Claire's violence, but the continuation of a story that had been unfolding long before Rosewood ever knew her name. Months after Emily's disappearance, the case reached a devastating turning point. Search teams had scoured miles of forest and farmland before stumbling upon a shallow grave deep in the woods far outside Rosewood. Inside were the remains of a teenage girl. DNA confirmed what everyone feared: it was Emily. The discovery removed any lingering hope that she might still be alive and transformed the case from a search into a homicide investigation. But it was the condition of her remains that left investigators shaken, even those accustomed to grim discoveries. Evidence revealed that Emily had suffered extensively before her death, enduring injuries that matched the methods described in Claire's journals. It was not a quick or accidental end. It was the result of prolonged cruelty. Forensic experts pieced together a chilling timeline. Marks on the bones showed repeated trauma, suggesting Emily had been subjected to physical punishment over weeks or months. The grave contained remnants of restraints, supporting the theory that she had been held captive, just as the basement evidence had indicated. This wasn't the story of a runaway who had met with misfortune. It was the conclusion of a calculated pattern of torment carried out by someone meant to protect her. The prosecutors now had more than suspicion and speculation; they had concrete proof. The journals, the basement, and the grave formed a line of evidence that was impossible to ignore. Each piece confirmed the other, painting a picture of systematic abuse that escalated until it ended in death. Claire's attempt to present herself as a victim of circumstance unraveled in the face of such overwhelming facts. While Daniel pleaded for justice, Claire remained unyielding, showing no visible signs of guilt or sorrow. Her composure, once interpreted as strength, now looked like something much colder: indifference to human suffering. The courtroom became the stage where the truth was laid bare. Prosecutors described Emily's final days with grim precision, presenting images of the basement, excerpts from the journals, and forensic findings from the grave. Each revelation left the room silent, the weight of horror pressing down on everyone who listened. Jurors were forced to confront the unimaginable: that a stepmother had inflicted such cruelty not out of sudden anger but through deliberate, sustained actions. Witnesses testified to the changes they had seen in Emily before her disappearance. Friends described her fear of being home, her shrinking confidence, and the way she seemed trapped even before she physically vanished. Teachers recounted her declining work and distant behavior. All of it fit into the narrative of someone living under constant pressure, waiting for a chance at escape that never came. For Daniel, sitting in the courtroom and listening to the details, it was a torment of its own. He had trusted Claire, believed she would bring stability to their family, and instead watched as the evidence revealed her as the architect of his daughter's suffering. Each detail not only condemned Claire, but also tore deeper into the wounds of a father who realized he had been living alongside his child's tormentor. By the time the evidence was fully presented, there was little doubt left about what had happened. The grave in the woods was the final chapter of Emily's life, but in the courtroom it became the most powerful piece of proof against Claire. It showed that everything hidden in the basement, everything written in the journals, had not been fantasy or exaggeration. It was real, and it had ended in tragedy. The verdict seemed inevitable, yet the community braced itself, knowing the conclusion would still bring shock waves no matter how certain the outcome appeared. The trial of Claire Carter drew nationwide attention. transforming the quiet town of Rosewood into a symbol of hidden evil. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, cameras flashing each morning as Claire was escorted inside. To many, she had become the embodiment of betrayal, a woman who had promised to care for her stepdaughter but instead orchestrated months of cruelty that ended in death. The community that once prided itself on safety now watched as the darkest truths of its most notorious resident were revealed in chilling detail. The prosecution built its case around evidence so devastating that there was little room for doubt. The journals, written in Claire's own hand, provided a direct window into her mind. They chronicled punishments, rules, and degrading treatment, each entry a stark reminder of Emily's daily torment. The basement itself became a witness, with photographs showing the restraints and the mattress that bore silent testimony to what had taken place there. Forensic experts explained the injuries found on Emily's remains, connecting them point by point with the notes Claire had kept. It was as though she had documented her own crimes, believing no one would ever uncover them. The defense attempted to argue mental instability, painting Claire as a woman overwhelmed by responsibility and clouded by emotional turmoil. But their claims fell flat against the cold precision of the evidence. There was nothing chaotic about the way Emily had been treated. The journals showed planning, structure, and intent. Even the abrupt ending of the entries suggested a decision had been made, one that concluded with Emily's disappearance and eventual death. Jurors listened in silence, their faces tight with anger and disbelief as each piece of testimony reinforced the picture of deliberate cruelty. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, aggravated torture, and unlawful imprisonment. Claire was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Some gasped, others cried, and Emily's father collapsed into quiet sobs as the weight of justice settled over the room. The woman who had once walked freely through their community would never do so again, yet for Daniel, the relief of a conviction could not erase the loss of his daughter or the haunting knowledge that he had unknowingly brought Claire into Emily's life. Outside the courthouse, people spoke of the case with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Parents held their children closer. Neighbors who once trusted blindly now looked twice at those around them, and the name Claire Carter became a warning whispered in conversations about trust and betrayal. Rosewood's reputation for peace had been permanently scarred. Where there had once been comfort in the belief that evil lurked far away, the trial proved it could live behind closed doors just down the street. Claire herself remained stoic as the sentence was handed down, her face expressionless, her eyes cold. To the end, she offered no words of remorse, no acknowledgement of the suffering she had caused. Her silence only deepened the sense of unease, as though she had never truly grasped the gravity of her actions or perhaps had never cared. Emily's story became more than a tragedy. It became a reminder of how easily cruelty can be hidden behind ordinary facades. The basement, the journals, and the grave in the woods were no longer just pieces of evidence. They were symbols of a darkness that thrived in secrecy until it was forced into the light. For Rosewood, and for anyone who heard the story, the legacy of the case was clear. Justice had been served, but the memory of what had been uncovered would never fade. Emily's voice had been stolen, yet in the end, it was her silence that condemned the stepmother who thought she would never be caught.